We have some breaking news we want to show you. The lights are out at the Statue of Liberty. The statue plunged into darkness in the middle of New York Harbor. You can just about see it there. You see the base right in the middle of your screen. See the flashing lights there, the bottom, and then right in the middle should be the Statue of Liberty, which is usually lighted right now. No word yet on whether or not this is a power failure, but we'll continue to update you on that. Of course, that iconic statue there, the lights are always on. Now I want to turn out to the White House, doubling down on President Trump's accusation that former President Barack Obama wiretapped Trump Tower during last year's campaign. And the press secretary, Sean Spicer, saying the president has absolutely no regrets about making the unsubstantiated claim. I want to bring in now CNN senior political commentator David Axelrod, a former senior advisor to President Obama, and historian Jon Meacham, the author of Destiny and Power. Thank you, gentlemen. Good evening to you. Let's see. David,
Hey,
I'm going to start with you. Tonight, multiple top Republicans say that they have seen no evidence that the former president, Barack Obama, wiretapped President Trump. Listen to this.
We don't have anything today that would send us in that direction, but that's not to say that we might not find something.
I don't know what the basis of his statement is, so I really can't comment on that.
Have you seen any evidence of that?
Mr. Leader, I wish Senator Gardner.
No, I haven't.
I have not. I mean, I have not seen that evidence. As you know, I think that a lot of that was maybe a little bit. The multiple tweets were perhaps a little bit strung together.
So, but the White House is not backing down from their claim that they want an investigation. An investigation based on what, though?
Yeah, well, look, I think both things can be true. I think they can have no regrets and there can be no evidence. And we've seen that before. Your panel mentioned earlier the comments he made over Twitter about the 3 to 5 million people who voted illegally. And at that time, the same pattern took place. The White House said, there's no evidence that it didn't happen, so someone ought to examine it. And this has been an ongoing thing with this president. He has no filter, and he gets on Twitter. And, most of us have a thought box, and then we have thoughts that we express publicly. He has no filter, and he just goes right to, and if he's read a conspiracy theory, apparently that was the provocation here, he takes it right to Twitter if it suits his mood, and then it leaves everybody else scrambling. I would think, as a former White House staffer, that it would be the most miserable job on the planet right now to try and be a spokesperson for the president, because you have to justify the unjustifiable. It's very tough for the people on the Hill, Republicans who want his signature on their legislation, and therefore they want to play along. The Republicans are still supportive of him, their constituents. They want to play along. But it really strains credulity to have to answer these questions all the time. And I suspect that this is a pattern that's not going to change. And let me just finish by saying, Don, we're 1 week out from when the president gave what I thought was a very effective speech to the Congress. And one of the takeaway lines was, the time for trivial fights are over. And boy, does that seem like a distant memory, doesn't it?
Yeah. I had practically forgotten about it, considering what happened. Jon Meacham, I don't know if you were laughing. That laugh was out loud that you gave there. But I just want to the point that David just made, can we put up, these are the inauguration pictures. And we went back and forth about this, and everyone knew exactly what was happening here. The National Park Service released a series of photos. And they show the crowds during the last 3 inaugurations in response to the Freedom of Information Act requests from various media outlets. The White House knew these photos would not back up their claims.
Right.
So the question is, there's no proof about wiretapping. There's no proof to the crowd size. Why lie?
I have a new theory, which, and I laughed because David was right, saying that, imagine having to defend this. It's just an amazing thing. It seems to me that President Trump is not actually speaking to us anymore. He's speaking, I think, to the 44% or so of people who approve of his performance. By the way, Richard Nixon had slightly better numbers on the day in April of '73 when Bob Haldeman and John Ehrlichman resigned. And so for people who are charting this historically, that's kind of where the numbers are. I think that he's now, and perhaps always has been, simply speaking to his base. He's made.
But is that 44%? Pardon the interruption. They believe when he tells mistruths. Are you saying that they believe that?
I think that enough of them do, or he wouldn't be doing it.
Okay.
I really do. I think that he puts this out there, and people who don't follow this as obsessively as the rest of us, who in other parts of their life are probably healthier, therefore. But I think it becomes part of a kind of catastrophic news environment where people believe that, well, oh, wait, didn't Obama wiretap him? We never saw that birth certificate. I mean, it's just these continual post-truth stories that at a certain point have a corrosive effect on the public trust.
Yeah.
And I think that for those of us who, and we were talking last Tuesday, those of us who think that he's trying to lead the whole country, it's like Lucy in the football. Every time we go, he pulls it away.
Yeah. Hey, David, I have something that's just speaking of, we were talking about the wiretapping thing. This is from the Wall Street Journal. I want to get your response to that. They're saying that the former president is livid, President Obama livid over the Trump allegations. He said, but he was livid. This is a quote from the Wall Street Journal. He was livid over the accusation that he bugged the Republican campaign offices, believing that Mr. Trump was questioning both the integrity of the office of the president and Mr. Obama himself. People familiar with his thinking said. What's your response to that?
Well, I don't have a response to it. Just knowing him as I do, I'm sure he was livid, and less livid about himself. I don't think anybody believes Barack Obama. I mean, it may be that John's right, that there's a core of President Trump's supporters who may believe it, but I think the broader public doesn't believe that. If anybody knows anything about how all of this works, it's impossible to believe this scenario. But the point John makes is the most important one, and this has been my concern about this president. You know, elections come and go and policies change, and you may not like the way the policies change, but that's the nature of democracy. But this constant drumbeat of attack against institutions, whether it's the former president, the courts, the media, sort of the fundamental pillars of our democracy, that has a potentially long-term corrosive effect that may, in his view, serve his short-term politics, but in the long term is very unhealthy for our country.
I don't think people, I think people may want to believe it, but I think any rationally thinking person cannot come to the conclusion that this is true, especially considering, John, President Trump's wiretapping accusation it's not the only unsubstantiated claim that he is currently pushing. Look at today. This is what he tweeted today. He said 122 vicious prisoners released by the Obama administration from Gitmo have returned to the battlefield. Just another terrible decision. But if you look at the numbers and if you look at the facts, 113 of the prisoners were released during President George W. Bush's administration. Yeah. So can we believe what this president says?
No.
Why does he still have a phone for Twitter? But go on.
Well, no, we can't. And my point is that this is part of a concerted propagandistic effort that's anathema to the kind of data-based truth in our politics that has characterized us since the Philadelphia in the late 1780s. I mean, I really believe this. And I mean, you all may say that people don't believe this, but I think there's this snow machine that he turns on, and it complicates, it fills the air. I've been watching the captions on your network all day, and it's saying about wiretapping and Obama and Trump Tower. And I think it creates an ambient atmosphere of distrust. And I believe that insofar as there is a method to this madness, that's what the President of the United States is doing. Because guess what? How the hell did he get there but by creating an ambient sense of distrust about the very legitimacy of the birth and citizenship of the 44th President of the United States? It has worked before. And I think we're being naive if we think that somehow or another our reason-based, our analysis will make it go away.
Imagine that. He was rewarded for conspiracy theories and lying by becoming
Yes, he
president
was.
of the United
He is the
States.
president of the United States, and he took out David was one of the main people on the planet who helped elect Barack Obama. And I would ask him, I mean, do you think that the birth certificate propaganda hurt the president and helped Trump?
Well, there's no doubt it was an impediment, and it stoked up the base, and it certainly helped in these midterm elections. I mean, President Obama won two very solid victories in his election and his re-election, and he retired with a very high approval rating, which I sometimes think is also bothers the incumbent when he looks at his own numbers. But clearly, it took up a lot of time. It created a lot of grit. It threw a lot of sand in the works, and I think that was the point. Look, Donald Trump is a marketer. He is a brander. He is a reader of audiences. He thinks this sells to his base, and it may sell to his base. The question is, how do you govern this way? And ultimately, where does it all lead? And I'm not sure he has a very good concept of that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Obamacare and who it actually affects. Some of the voters, many of the voters, people who voted for this president would be affected if Obamacare went away. We'll discuss that. We'll be right back. President Trump today publicly supporting the Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Back with me now, David Axelrod and Jon Meacham. I mean, David, to be honest with you, when you listen to what they have proposed, it sounds like Obamacare or the ACA light. I mean, they rolled out this plan to dismantle the president's signature health care law. Some Republicans are calling it light, as I said. But what's your reaction to that as a man that was by President Obama's side as he crafted this law?
Well, look, I think that what you're seeing here is the collision of politics and the reality of governing. It's been a good strategy for the Republicans for the last 3 cycles to run against Obamacare, to run against the Affordable Care Act, to say we're going to repeal and replace it with something better. And then, as I've said before, they were the dogs that caught the car. And now they have to produce. And what they're finding is, the president has said, we're going to eliminate all those things you don't like about this Affordable Care Act, and we're going to keep all the good things. Well, it's very hard to do both, and they're caught in this game of twister. And so their right-wing, or their Republican conservative base is unhappy because it doesn't completely abolish government support for people who need health care. Moderate Republicans are very upset because it will ultimately decimate Medicaid, and a lot of the Republican governors understand that and are very concerned about that. It's going to mean 10 or 15 million people will lose their health coverage. And the interesting thing about it, Don, is the people most likely to be hurt by this are low, middle-income workers who have benefited from this program, older people who are going to have to pay more if this were the plan that was to pass, and rural communities that are very subject to losing their hospitals because of what is going to happen now, and because they're going to be overrun by paid for expenses for people who lose their insurance. So all of this hits that very base that elected Donald Trump president. So it's a big, hot mess. Whether they can get it through the Congress, I think, is a very, very big question right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because many of the people who supported this president, as I said before the break, and who voted for this president are going to be the ones who are affected if it is repealed and not replaced by anything, or even if it's repealed and replaced and it's not perfect, they're going to be the ones that suffer. I mean, Jon Meacham, you wrote the foreword to this new book, and it's titled "We Do Our Part Toward a Fair and More Equal America" by legendary journalist and editor Charles Peters. Peters, a well-known liberal, is now criticizing the Democratic Party for catering to the professional class at the expense of blue-collar voters. Does he think Democrats can turn things around now?
All right. Charlie is eternally an optimist. He's a West Virginian who ran for the state legislature, grew up during the Depression. He ran JFK's campaign in the biggest county in West Virginia. And one of the things that struck him as he was working on this book, which is about really kind of recreating the ethos of the New Deal, the spirit of generosity that helped us defeat the Depression, win World War II, become the dominant power in the world, was that people overcame their prejudice against the first Catholic president. That was an incredibly difficult sell to make. in 1960. And so he has seen the country change in great ways as he's 90 years old. I mean, it's been a remarkable thing. But a lot of those folks who were voting for Jack Kennedy voted for Donald Trump. And Charlie was a West Virginia Democrat. And it's been an incredibly difficult journey, as David knows, for those kinds of white voters. What Charlie wants us to do, and what I think all of us want, regardless of partisanship, is what was it about the country in the 1930s and 40s that enabled us to take on monumental problems, sacrifice a little bit for the common good, and build a world that won a war, that created civil rights. This is the anniversary of the march in Selma. It took too long to get the kind of social progress we needed, but we got it. And how do we get that back?
Maybe we weren't so spoiled back then. Well, I wasn't around, but maybe the country wasn't so spoiled back then. Who knows?
Well,
Don,
a lot of it's about the economy. You're right. A lot of it's about a lot of us are very affluent, and a lot of us, as Charlie likes to say, we pull up the ladder, and we forget about where we came from, and we can't do that.
David, I'm out of time, but quick last word again.
Yeah, no, look, I think that the Democratic Party failed in the last election to speak to the entire country and to have an economic message. But I will say this, Donald Trump has made lavish promises to these people who voted for him. In the short run, I think they're going to be very supportive. In the long run, they're going to look around and say, has my life really been improved or not? Has he kept those promises? I think that's a big hurdle for him to clear.
David, John, thank you so much. I appreciate our time tonight. Thanks.
Thanks.
We come right back. Repealing and replacing Obamacare was one of President Trump's top campaign promises, but will his own voters be the ones who really pay the price?